Today we're building an inexpensive compact wood cart from 2x4s and one sheet.
Whoa, hold up. 2x4s? I thought you said this thing's gonna be inexpensive, Rodriguez.
Chuck, I get it, man. Lumber prices are crazy right now.
Hey, you're telling me. Last week they made me fill out a credit application just to go down the dang lumber aisle.
I know, man. That's why we're gonna save people some money and build it out of just a sheet of plywood and 8 2x4s.
Oh, look at you, man of the people, huh?
Times are tough, and I gotta clean up this mess somehow.
Hey, looks like you need all the help you can get, man.
Well, maybe if somebody else worked around here.
I'm kind of busy, man.
Let's build something awesome.
As expensive as 2x4s are these days, they can still be pretty gnarly pieces of wood. So save yourself some trouble and buy the straightest ones that you can find at the big box store. Even then, they're still going to have some bows to them, so I picked the worst ones to use for the base. After in-cutting each board to get a square reference end, and do not be fooled into thinking that they are square from the factory, I cut a couple boards for the length of the base. And this, friends, is why I upgraded to a miter station from my old mobile miter stand. Now, I can easily do end cuts on 8-foot boards from either side. Then I move the stop block in and I cut 4 cross braces that'll connect those longer boards for the base. Now, I'm sizing my wood rack to be 6 feet long and wide enough to hold 4 or 5 sheets of plywood on one side, longer boards in the middle, and plywood offcuts or mid-range boards on the other side. Now, my current plywood storage is to lean it against my lathe stand, which I never use, and I've got narrow boards, short offcuts, and plywood leftovers strewn across the shop in different places. So this rack is going to replace all of those and really tidy up the shop. And after drilling the pocket holes, I can move on to assembly.
It'd probably be easiest for you to assemble on the floor, and you can find a flat spot in your garage. I know this area is kind of the flattest in my garage. Before you start assembly, go ahead and check your boards and put it so that the bow, the middle of it, is down against the floor. And that way when we assemble it and flip it over, then it's going to be bowed up and it's going to help resist that weight, so that will kind of flex and straighten out versus already have a bow to it and get worse over time.
I laid out the frame and I used a clamp at the end to butt everything flush together, and I screwed them in place with 2.5-inch pocket screws. And when attaching the other end, I made sure that I pressed everything down against the floor because the bow in the boards is going to want to raise up those long ones higher than the short boards. The interior braces add strength, but they'll also be used to attach the inner A-frames, which we'll be making later. So I used some spacers to position the brace, and then I pulled out my little used foot clamp. I must have been all hopped up on Diet Dew, as I'm more of a clamp it tight kind of guy. And apparently I felt like I was getting a little too crazy, so I went back to the clamp for the other brace.
We'll just be using one sheet of 3/4-inch plywood for this build, like I said, and this is radiata pine. It's a good alternative to, say, something like a Baltic birch, which I typically use. This is a lot less expensive, and also it'll hold screws well because it's got nice thick plies to it. I'm going to cut the plywood on the floor, and I often get asked, what is this pink stuff on the floor that I'm cutting on top of? This is rigid foam insulation. It's very light, but it's nice and stable. It's 1 inch thick, and it supports the cut and the wood so that when I'm going through it, it doesn't fall off after the cut.
I cut the sheet to length to match the base, and I'm also going to get all of the cross braces for the A-frames from this long section later.
Now I need to cut the plywood to width for the base, so I have put the extension on my track saw so I can go ahead and cut that. If you don't have a track saw, these things are awesome. They make cuts a lot more accurate and easy. And you can get this specific one, the Craig track saw from Woodcraft. They have great stores all across America in over 70 metropolitan cities. But if there's not one local to you, you can check out their website. I've got a link down below in the description where you can check out all the stuff I'm using in today's project. And a big thank you to Woodcraft for sponsoring today's video.
Now, of course, working on the ground is fine when needed, but scratch your head every once in a while and make sure you really need to be there. Ah yes, this is much better. I put the plywood panel on the frame, and at this point, my engineer kicked in, and I started precisely laying out the screws to hold it down. Don't ask me why I do this, just enjoy the precision and rapid screw install before it's all for naught in about 3 minutes.
The top of the lumber rack is going to be out of 2x4s, and I'm going to make those in an A-frame style with a 3-degree tilt in on them. I looked at a ton of different lumber rack designs out there, and a lot of them use sheet goods. But if you use sheet goods on top, you're going to have 2 full sheets just on making those side frames. So using the 2x4s is going to help us reduce the total amount of material that we need, and when the price of 2x4s goes back down, this lumber rack will be even cheaper to build.
I set the saw for a 3-degree miter so that I could cut the boards on edge. You could also use the bevel setting on your miter saw and cut them flat, but I hate using the bevel feature. I don't know why I hate that either, I just do. The cart has 4 sets of the A-frames, and I cut all the tall sides first. Now the stop block worked great for these, and I got 2 sides per 2x4.
Now, for the legs of the A-frame, I'm going to go ahead and cut the connector pieces that go in the middle. I'm going to start with the top one, and that one is very small. So I'm going to use this little 10-inch spacer, and I'm going to keep my hands very far away from the blade. So make sure when you're cutting those small pieces, don't get the urge to put your hand in there, keep it away, either clamp it or do what I'm going to do, which is going to be hold the board on the other side and then let the saw stop before I remove the piece.
The connectors have opposite angles on each side so that they'll fit in between those 2 side pieces. So after each cut, I flipped the board over before I made the next one. This saves wood also, and it lets you get a lot more out of the 2x4.
All right, so I've had a little bit of a development. I laid out the A-frame and I started to assemble it just to see how it would look. It's just too narrow on that top and I want a little bit more room. So I'm actually going to adjust it by about 1 inch and increase that top size. Sometimes when you draw things on a computer and then when you see them in real life, there's a little bit of a difference. But the beauty is that you don't have to do that because I make the plans for you, which I will be adjusting to meet these new dimensions. If you want the plans that are available for this, there's a link down below in the description for you to check out.
As I jump back to the saw to make the next cuts, I forgot to let the blade stop, and here's what can happen. Now, without support on the wood, the spinning teeth can grab the block and just send it flying, so don't do that. Now for the next set of the connectors, the block was long enough that I could clamp it to the fence during the cut. Now, this is a way better way to go, and it prevents a game of find the wood block after you blast it off of your saw. I cut the rest of the connectors for the A-frames to finish off all the parts so that I could assemble.
All right, fast forward, I actually put one of these together and this is just not what I was looking for. There's just not enough storage here, and also the 3 degrees is just a little bit too tall and I want to make sure that they don't fall over or anything. So I'm going to redesign it at 5 degrees, widen this up, and I'm actually going to make the base wider as well. So don't be scared if you're in the middle of a project and you think it's not going well. You can always change direction.
Yep, I had to remove all those rigorously spaced screws that I had just laid out and expand the base for the new size. I think it was just a sign that I need to just let that precision thing go. Or maybe it's just today's version of mistakes were made. Now I'll breeze through this portion since you've seen me do this song and dance already, but I was able to reuse almost all the wood from the base and the frames. But the only parts I couldn't use again were the 2 smallest connectors, but they'll make good doorstops or something. But after patching the plywood panel onto the new base, I set my saw to 5 degrees and I remade all the A-frame pieces with the new dimensions, and then I could jump into assembly. I grabbed a pair of the sides for an A-frame and I clamped them together. And then I laid out where each connector rung would fall on both sides for a good visual cue when I'm putting in each rung. Now these are a little bit odd to try and put a clamp on them and screw them together, so I put my hand clamp to work here. Now of course the hand clamp is only so strong, so I drilled pilot holes first before driving in a 2.5-inch screw. Now this takes a little bit more time, but it's going to make sure that those connectors are in the right place that you need them. Now attaching the other side is a lot easier since you can clamp everything together and do several of the pilot holes at once.
All right, and this size feels a lot better. I feel like I'm going to be able to definitely fit some more wood in here, and also the angle on this guy is going to be more comfortable and make sure that that wood is not falling off. So I'm going to go ahead and make the other 3 and then we can get them onto the platform.
That's just rinse and repeat again here, but it's a good idea to check the assemblies against each other as you're making them to make sure that things are lining up correctly. At one point, I'd marked the last rung an inch too low, but it quickly stood out when I set it next to the other ones. But unfortunately, I didn't catch everything.
Got the 4 A-frames here, and I'm going to connect those with plywood after I get them on the base, but I forgot to put pocket holes on the base because that's how I'm going to attach them. So if you're going to build one, make sure that you drill the pocket holes beforehand and not after it's assembled, because it'll be a lot easier.
Now before putting the A-frames on, I attached the casters that I'll be using. I have these industrial casters that were from another project, and they're rated at 325 pounds a piece, so I'm just going to be using 4 here. But if you're using regular duty casters, you'll probably want to go with another pair in the middle because this thing fully loaded is going to be really heavy. Then I flip the base over, and I use my combination square to mark reference lines so they'd be exactly the same space from the edge. I started with one end, and then I put the frame flush with the short edge, and I secured it to the base with 2.5-inch pocket screws. Then I could use the same spacers that I used from assembling the base to locate the next frame. This puts it right over the bracing that I did use for that base frame, and it'll make a really solid connection. I went to the other end and I repeated the same process and had everything in place. And now is also a good time to check your assemblies for some wonkiness.
So we all know that 2x4s are notorious for having some twists and turns to them. So I used my 6-foot level, and if you have any kind of long straight edge, you could do this to check to make sure everything is in the same plane. This back one was actually out a little bit. So I'm gonna loosen it up and pull it flush, but you can use this on both sides to make sure that everything is in the right plane before you move to the next step and start putting the plywood strips on.
And next I needed some plywood strips ripped at 5-degree angles. Now since the 2x4 frames are giving all of the support and the structure to the lumber rack, we don't need full sheets of plywood on the sides. These strips of ply will let the large sheets just slide along the rack and keep the other wood from falling as it's laying against it.
I've got all my strips here, and they have the 5-degree bevel so that when I put it up against the sides here, it's gonna match that angle and have a flat top. So there'll be one strip across the top, which will allow me to put some 1/4-inch plywood and make this a full shelf, and then I'll be able to do the same thing lower down.
I clamped a scrap of plywood to the rungs to position the strips on the same plane, and it worked really well. Also, using quick clamps as a third hand is great for holding up those long strips while you're working on the other end of them. I only used 1 screw per A-frame, and I made sure to check behind each strip so I wasn't hitting the screws that were holding the rungs in. And to keep any material from sliding off the edge of the cart, I ripped 2 strips from the last section of the plywood. I attached these up about 1 inch off the base, using yet another scrap piece to help with alignment. And this is why I don't throw out scraps. I'm always grabbing them for stuff like this, and they just all seem so precious. Now you could leave the middle rungs open, but I have a lot of smaller offcuts that I want to put in here. So I'm going to be using a sheet of Luan, and yes, this stuff is still pretty cheap, to cover up those openings. Now I used a full-size strip for the top of the cart, and I'll probably put my most used items up here, like spacers, shims, and the such. And I attached the Luan with some me-nails. Now for the interior shelves, I cut the sheet into 3 strips for each level. Then I could mark where the frame landed and cut out notches so that it would go around it and slide into place. Now this worked out great for the 2nd and 3rd shelf, but for that 4th shelf, the plywood just got too wide and I couldn't wedge them in there. So I just clipped the entire corners enough for it to pass by the frames, and then they could slide right in. And for one more custom feature, I decided to dedicate a small space to some vertical storage. I cut some of that leftover plywood to rough size first, and I also cut the outer supports. And then I took the large piece to my bench and I laid out a line to match the lean back of the uprights, and then I could fit the opening at the bottom as well. Now, the Craig track saw is great for cutting angles on small parts like this. After that first cut, I could use that piece to mark the second piece that I wanted to cut and have an exact match. Easy peasy. I drilled pocket holes on the bottom and angled sides, and then I attached them to the cart. And I put that first side flush with the end. After both sides were on there, I pre-drilled the supports and I screwed them onto the front. These will keep any of those skinny parts from falling forward. I cut 2 dividers and I attached them to the upper and middle support to segment that bay into 2 parts.
This little stand-up bin right here would be great for things like dowels or any other little things that I want to just have all contained right here. But you could also go all the way down and have the vertical storage all the way across. But I tend to have more sheet goods, so having full sheets on the back and sheets on this side is going to work for me. And also in general, if you need a smaller footprint, you can do a 4-foot version as well, which would work great. And you've probably noticed it, but we've got new merch. Mistakes Were Made t-shirts, link down below in the description if you want to grab one for yourself.
And now came the fun part, loading this bad boy up. I grabbed the large sheets of plywood that were leaning on the lathe stand first. Now the MDF isn't full width, but it is still 8 feet long, and it does fit nicely on the cart with a foot overhang on each end. Now the wood I was storing vertically here, it got swallowed up by the interior shelves of the new cart. And I was taking all the short offcuts from this rickety rack and trying to find the best spot for everything. I'm probably going to be rearranging these after I use it some to see where things fit best, but I definitely sent some of those smaller pieces to the s'mores pile. Now this sucker holds a ton of wood, and it's going to make way for the redesign that I've been looking for in my shop. But apparently, Chuck has other plans for it.
Oh man, I've always wanted to ride one of these things. If you have plans to build your own wood cart, I've got a link down below in the description where you can pick those up. I've also got some videos queued up for you right here for some more shop organization. And I want to give a big thank you to all those folks that are joining the Builders Club. Thank you so much. I'll catch you guys on the next video.